Bible, the Greek text to the King James Bible, Textus Receptus, or the what is called the Byzantine text. For those who don't know, in the 19th century, the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were discovered. Ancient manuscripts around about 330 AD from Egypt. Their origin is from Egypt and Alexandria, which is known to be kind of a very Gnostic area. Two bishops, Westcott and Hort, said those are the manuscripts go to that we do our scholarship from concerning how we develop a text for the Bible, Greek New Testament text. So modern scholarship since the 19th century has developed. We found many more manuscripts, etc. But at that time, there was a guy called Dean Bergen who disagreed with Westcott and Hort and said, no, the text behind the King James, the Greek text, is actually solid. There's so much data, so much evidence. But because they said the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus was older, the scholars went with Westcott and Hort and disagreed with Dean Bergen. But one of the things that Dean Bergen did, he did a 16-volume work cataloguing all the quotations of the Church Fathers. That 16-volume work is in the Library of London. And if you look at that 16-volume work, the quotations of the Fathers, and these quotations are before any of the ancient manuscripts that we have of the New Testament, mainly, they all back the King James text, the Greek text behind the King James. And that's basically a fact. It's a fact that so for example, the last ending of Mark, NIV would say that that's not in there, but you go to Dean Bergen's analysis of the Church Fathers that goes before any ancient manuscript on Mark. It verifies the last ending of Mark. That's just an example. Now, because modern scholarship went with Westcott and Hort's theory, so you had, at the time of Dean Bergen and on after, you had thousands of manuscripts from different areas, not just Egypt and Alexandria, where it was known as Gnostic, but you had thousands of other manuscripts that Westcott and Hort and others just did not look at. They didn't want to look at because they said they weren't the oldest. But if you look at the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus under ultraviolet light and you analyze it, there's around about 4 editors in the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, and it was a very mutilated text where it was heavily edited. And what scholars don't tell you is the editing was pushing towards showing that they were concerned about these texts, and the scribes were concerned about these texts, and that it was pushing towards the text as receptus, or the text behind the King James Version, the corrections of the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Now, in modern scholarship, we have scholars like Gordon Fee, who's an evangelical, Wallace, who's an evangelical, Don Carson, who's an evangelical, all said that Dean Bergen's scholarship, it's not really relevant because we haven't really got a proper edition of the Church Fathers, and the editions that we have, even when we look at it, it doesn't agree with Dean Bergen. But the problem with that is when you actually dig deep with Don Carson, you dig deep with what Don Carson says, and dig deep what Gordon Fee says, and dig deep what Wallace says, they don't actually provide any evidence. There's no evidence in the scholarship. On top of that, when you get any Greek New Testament with the notes of the manuscripts, they invariably, over the last 80 years, they've invariably said, we have consulted the Church Fathers. But actually, when you look at these Greek New Testaments, the Nestle Greek New Testament, for example, which has the markings of manuscripts, when you actually go to these editions, when they're giving you a Greek New Testament like the Nestle and Allen Greek New Testament, and it has you markings of the various texts, manuscripts, they'll all say, we've consulted the Church Fathers. The fact of the matter is, they haven't. They didn't do the scholarship. In fact, It's been accepted by Alan, who was a major scholar in this, who was behind the modern Greek New Testament for the NIV and other. He acknowledges that if you actually did go to the Church Fathers, it would actually back up the Textus Receptus, or the text behind the King James Version. But they won't really go to the Church Fathers because they know it contradicts their theory, that it actually backs up the King James Version, the Greek text of the King James Version. So when you actually look at Don Carson, Allen, when you look at Gordon Fee, when you look at Wallace, when you look at other scholars who've done these New Testament, Greek New Testaments, they'll all mention that they've consulted the Church Fathers. They do not provide the data or evidence. Very important. They don't provide the data. In other words, they'll select a few Church Father quotes, but Dean Bergen tabulated 80. Is it 80,000 or 8,000? I can't remember. But it was thousands and thousands. I think it was 80,000. Yeah, it was 80,000 quotations of the church of the New Testament. And in those 80,000 tabulations, it verifies the King James text. Interesting that modern scholarship refuses to, in textual criticism, there is a refusal to take a more in-depth, serious look at the Church Fathers and how they handled the New Testament text. They argue it away and say, oh, we haven't got a proper full edition of all the Fathers. That's what they keep saying after generation after generation. And yet they still use the editions what Dean Bergen used to make some arbitrary, subjective opinion or statement. But they certainly do not do the in-depth scholarship that Dean Bergen did, which is over 80,000 quotations of the New Testament. So what does this all tell you? It tells you that in modern textual criticism, there is a bias towards a certain theory of Westcott and Hall that is still strongly there. It's denied very often by evangelical scholars. It's denied very often by scholars. Or will use an eclectic text. By definition, because they hold to the Westcotton theory, they cannot accept any Byzantine or Textus Receptus reading in the early Church Fathers. It cannot be. They can't accept it. So what am I saying? I'm saying that behind the textual criticism of the King James, the Church Fathers actually back it up. And there is a running bias throughout modern scholarship towards a certain theory of textual criticism, which is subjective and arbitrary, and doesn't want to engage in the massive scholarship that Dean Bergen. Time and time again, Dean Bergen scholarship is dismissed. 16 volumes, 80,000 quotations tabulated, all backing up the King James text, Greek text of the New Testament. This scholarship, for generations and generations, has never been taken seriously, has been ignored. And when we hear even evangelical scholars like Don Carson, even scholars like Gordon Fee, even scholars like Wallace, there's never really any solid data provided. It's very arbitrary and subjective. Certainly not a study of 80,000 quotations of the Church Fathers that Dean Bergen provided and others who are on that side. So what I'm saying to you is hold on to the King James Version and that line of translations, because that is where God preserved his word. And yeah, that's my thought. Church Fathers actually back up the King James Version in its Greek text. And the shocking thing is that if you go and looked, and I've looked at about 8 or 9 or maybe more of early Greek New Testaments published, the Nestle Greek New Testament, Alan Gressel Nestle Greek New Testament, they all say we have consulted the fathers. A, they don't provide the evidence, and B, they actually acknowledge that if they were to go to the fathers, it would actually contradict their theory. So they say that they've consulted them, but they don't provide the data, they don't provide the evidence. And even if they did, it's certainly not 80,000 quotations. And it's certainly not the in-depth scholarship that Dean Bergen did. But they are lying in those early Greek editions of the New Testament from the 1930s right up to modern times. The other thing as well is you need to know that behind the NIV, there was a lot of Catholic theologians involved in the Greek New Testament production for the NIV and other modern evangelical translations. Just thought I'd put that in. So what I was saying is scholarship is very subjective very often and very arbitrary. And theories, rather than facts, get to dominate scholars. So be very, very careful. Even someone like Don Carson, even someone like Gordon Fee, people who I respect, even they can make statements that are not rooted in any facts. Don Carson has made statements on this. James White has made statements on this. Gordon Fee has made statements on this. They make statements on it, but they do not provide the data. They do not provide the facts. Dean Bergen provided 16 volumes. 16 volumes. And they say, oh, well, he didn't have the best edition. But even today, scholars still go back to the volumes, the Church Father editions that he used. So you can't use that as an argument. So basically, it's not a conspiracy theory. This is a basic fact, absolute basic fact, that these scholars in the Greek New Testament editions always say, we have consulted the fathers, never provide any solid evidence, never provide solid scholarship on the fact that they've consulted the church fathers when they haven't. And they ignore or downplay Dean Bergen's 16-volume scholarship, 80,000 quotations of the church fathers, that backs up the King James Version in its Greek New Testament. They ignore that, not on the basis of data and evidence, but on the basis of a theory of Westcott and Hort. I rest my case. The final thing as well is Bergen scholarship is truly eclectic, truly looking at the Coptic, the Pishto, looking at all the various manuscripts from all the various areas of the ancient world, not just Alexandria. But yet these modern scholars say they are eclectic. They are an eclectic, that they're using all the manuscripts. It's total rubbish. They are using principally the theories of Westcott and Hort on the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, two texts that are butchered and have been edited by scribes who actually adhere to the Byzantine text and have tried to correct the Alexandria and Vaticanus. I rest my case.